Information, conversation to stimulate the inquisitive mind. Hey, it's the Dallas Action. Evidentiary analysis. People, places, things, events, ideas, all within the narrative of the assassination of John Kennedy. Welcome. How you guys doing? Welcome back, 22 November Network. This is the Dallas Action. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very, very, very much. Yes, thanks for joining us. Couple of things. Mr. Rob Clark over at the Lone Gunman, also with 22 November, has a new show up. It's pretty awesome. Orleans Parish, check it out. Same spot you found us. Miss Gail Nix Jackson, The View from Texas, has a really, really, really cool column up. It's called Another JFK Mystery, Lee Harvey Oswald and the Old Man in Ward 7. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it's something I did not know. I'd never heard before, and it's cool as heck. Also, The Grassy Knoll Girl, The View from Across the Pond. Also has a column. It's a link to an older column she did, and I've actually read it before, and it's very, very, very cool. It's called The American Express Connection to the Assassination, Part 1. Richard K. Snagel, Lee Harvey Oswald, and somebody named Michael Jelosevich. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I hope I am. But check that out. Read them. Go over to our site. Click back and read those columns because they're very cool. And it's like I say, it's information you might not hear anywhere else. And that's kind of what the deal is, share and collaborate amongst the research community, because one of you guys may be intrigued and dig into something on your own and dig into the documents and the evidence and find something of significance. That's what the whole point is, sharing. Excuse me, sweet tea break. Working together. And like I say, Orleans Parish, Rob's show that he put up today. All right, let's get into it. Now, the information, first of all, the title of the show tonight, The Strange and Terrible Saga of Harry Dean. And I've said for a while that Harry Dean may be the most important witness that a lot of people have never heard of. He may be. He's got a hell of a story and a hell of a background. And it's very interesting. And the people that Harry was pointing out to the FBI as early as 64 and 65 documented are people that maybe anyway. Let's just get into the story. Now, the information I'm about to share with you can be found in much more detail and with much more detailed analysis than I'm going to be able to give you tonight or today. It's actually about 12:30 a.m. on Sunday, so forgive me again. Anyway, in the book The Confessions, this information can be found in The Confessions of Harry Dean by Paul Trejo, who he's a friend of mine, and he's a researcher out of Texas, and he actually wrote this book with Harry Dean. Now, you can find his book at www.smashwords.com/book/3675550. It's an ebook. It's like $4.99. And I happen to know I believe Paul told me right, and correct me, Mr. Trejo, if I'm wrong, but there's a second edition coming because there's been some Freedom of Information Act activity in regards to some FBI documents that will corroborate a lot of Dean's story. I think I understand that right. So, but anyway, let's talk about Harry Dean. He was born in Canada, an American, in 27. Grew up in the Depression. During the Great Depression. Joined the Navy in 44. Learned to fly an airplane while he was in the Navy. Fast forward to 1958. Dean was 31 years old, and he was in a Chicago park, and he heard a speaker at a rally calling for support for Fidel Castro in the revolution against Batista in Cuba. And he was sort of taken in, by the presentation and got fired up in a fervor, overthrowing the evil dictator, and joined the cause there in Chicago. So Castro comes to power in 59, and Dean was rewarded. They actually made him an honorary member of the 26th of July movement. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to jump around a little bit, because what we've got is some of this in Dean's own words from a telephone interview he gave in 1968. Now, remember, this is very important. Dean went to the FBI with his story in 64. And to this day, he's never changed his story. Not once. He's never sought any kind of fame for his story. He wrote an ebook with Mr. Trejo, but it's a $4.99 ebook. He's not trying to get rich off a story or anything like some people. Madeline Brown, you know what I mean, and others. It's nothing like that. His story never changed. He stuck to it. But this interview is a telephone interview that he gave in 1968. And like I say, he was talking about being sucked into the movement. Excuse me. I lost my train of thought there. It derailed. And he actually became the head of the Chicago chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Now, does that sound familiar? Does to me. Now, listen to Harry's own words. This is that telephone interview. He says, well, anyway, to make a long story short, I was in the same outfit Oswald was, Fair Play for Cuba. He was an officer of it. But apparently he wasn't in it so deeply and in a different part of the country, but at the same time. The feds contacted me, the FBI, when I came back and blew the whistle to them a year while I was still an officer for that outfit in Chicago. The Fair Play for Cuba Committee, I was never a communist or a right-winger or a left-winger or anything. I was interested in the revolution. That's it. And I aided a little bit. So, Harry Dean gets sucked into that whole milieu, helping out Castro. But then Castro came to power and he flipped, went communist. Well, for a while, Dean didn't want to believe that Castro was going to turn communist, but he did. When President Eisenhower passed legislation, against Castro and his supporters in 59, he started providing information about everything he saw in the 26th of July movement. So he's made secretary of the Chicago Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and he's providing information to the FBI. So in his capacity, since he was such a capable fundraiser, he got invited to meet Fidel Castro in Cuba. So he does. He meets him for about 2 minutes in Cuba. And then he was immediately taken to an interrogation room, grilled for hours, threatened with a gun to his head. And just hours and hours, trying to make him confessed that he was an FBI spy. He denied the charges, and then so all of his Fair Play for Cuba committee buddies, they all vouched for him. So he was released, and he wanted to quit. But the FBI told him, hang in there, we need more information. But after a certain point, he just couldn't take the heat anymore. It was just getting to be too much for him, according to Dean. So he uprooted from California and uprooted his family from Chicago and moved out to California. And by that point, he was totally disillusioned with the left wing because he had supported Castro, and Castro had turned communist, and Castro had thrown him in an interrogation room, and they had put a gun to his head, and he had decided that he had been fooled by the left wing, and that wasn't going to happen again. So he joined the right wing. Long story short, he joined, in California, the John Birch Society. And when Harry joined up with the John Birch Society, he met some anti-Castro crusaders. Now, this is what Harry had to say, in his own words, in 1968 about that out in California. He says, so here in 1962, I joined up with a bunch of anti-Castro people, Cubans, Americans, and others, and then I found my way into circles of the political right, who were very effective in trying to do away with Castro. At least they were talking about it. Believe me, that's all they did was talk about it. Dean goes on, okay, I bought the right-wing line of things, and I'm not against them now, as a matter of fact. Except that I found out some things that horrified me. They were anti-communist and anti-Castro, and I hated Castro because they went communist. He goes on to say, I thought it was a great idea, the Americanisms, patriotisms, and all that stuff. So Harry is getting more involved in the ultra-right wing in California. And then he meets three individuals. He meets a guy named Guy Gabaldon, a real-life war hero. There was a movie about this guy called From Hell to Eternity made. It was a big movie. They showed it all the time. I remember watching that movie as a kid. And he met two other very interesting individuals, according to him. A guy named Larry Howard and a guy named Lorenzo Hall. Now, this is what Dean had to say about that whole group of people and what they were doing. This is what he had to say about that in 1968. He said individuals were donating money heavily. Well, the John Birch Society was talking against Castro, Cuba free and 63 and everything. And individuals were actually giving money to these different organizations, preferably to Hall and Howard. They got it, and other people in New Orleans and Dallas and Florida and so forth. The money got to them, and the medicine came from doctors, rich doctors. Interviewer. Now, when you say Hall, you mean Loren Hall, Lorenzo Hall. Right, says Dean. His nickname was Lorenzo, and Lawrence Howard is Larry Howard. Now, number 3 man was Guy Gabaldon. He was a Mexican-American, a one-time big hero. They made a movie about him called From Hell to Eternity. This was Gabaldon. This was Gabaldon. Later on, the evidence came out. He was this and that. And I said, apparently these people were the ones who did it. See, let's go back. He says this. Let me find it. And he's talking about this meeting that happened and what he found out. All right. After the assassination. This is what he says. He starts out talking about the movie about Gabaldon. He says they played every year on Channel 9, the liberal folks over there. Well, anyway, these people, I find out later, were going long before Weisberg, Harold Weisberg. And all the rest of those people came along writing books. It bore on my conscience. I informed the proper authorities about my involvement so I wouldn't become pinned down when they finally arrested them. Association with the assassination of Kennedy. Now, I immediately thought I told Oswald's mother. I said, "My God, woman, your son was doing the same job I was." That was my impression, and you don't get wrong impressions in a mess like that. Then later on, the evidence came out that he was this and that, and I said, apparently these people were the ones who did it, and then I thought, they didn't want Kennedy dead. The right wing was always trying to kill him. Gabaldon said he was going to kill him in 1962 when Kennedy visited Mexico City. He had an office in Mexico City, by the way, running an anti-communist front called the Drive Against Communist Aggression. This was Gabaldon, Dean. This was Gabaldon, Howard, Hall, me, and all the rest. And he was financed by some big businessmen here, and that's L.A., who I have a list of. Gabaldon had some friends in the Mexican Federal Police, the FBI in Mexico, who he tried to get to help with this Kennedy deal down there, to shoot Kennedy. In other words, he was on parade there in Mexico City, and I thought, well, the guy's crazy. He's not talking sense, and he didn't really mean he was going to kill Kennedy. He's talking about Gabaldon and Hall and Howard. And Hall and Howard. He says, you see these people, Oswald and whoever they blame for it. Even if he was involved, of note, which I doubt that he was, at least I think he was thinking, which means, ratting them out on them just like I was. Those people up there infiltrating, but they hated Kennedy. Don't you get it? They hated Kennedy. No fair play for Cuba. Communists hated Kennedy. I never heard some of the old line communists say they hated him, but I heard the right wing say they hated him. That dirty bastard should be dead. God damn him and all that sort of stuff. So Dean was right there amongst them. And what he's saying is Guy Gabaldon, the ex-war hero, the John Bircher, was working with the Mexican Federal Police down when Kennedy was actually in Mexico City. And they had a plan to whack Kennedy down there, is what he's telling us right there. See, now, in 1961, Gabaldon was enraged by the Bay of Pigs. And he decided to put his own raiding party together. But just like Pontchartrain and just like the way some of the Mongoose guys were ratting out some of the private operators down in Florida and ratting them out to customs, getting them busted on the docks with their raids. RFK, just like Pontchartrain, they had the FBI shut down Gabaldon's raiding party, which was put together with La Sombra, which was Hall's group that also incorporated Interpen guys. They were all intertwined. So that's when they met Hall and Howard. And along with Dean, they struck up this little deal. Gabaldon and Harry raised funds from Birchers, collected donations of weapons, ammunitions, medicines, sent to La Sombra, Interpen, other raiding groups. And that's what pretty much by that time Hall, Howard, and Seymour did on a full-time basis. Basically, from that point on, they were the gun runners and the medicine runners for these Cuban raids from the John Birchers in L.A. back to Florida. You know what I mean? And they would collect money on the way, and Hall would make the John Birch speeches, or John Bircher speeches and all that stuff. Okay, so let's fast forward. Let's fast forward now to September of 1963. September of 1963. There is a meeting after a John Bircher meeting in California. And at this meeting, John Rousselot, who is a congressman from California, big John Bircher, two other high-placed members of the John Birch Society. I think Robert Welch was there, and ex-United States Major General Edwin Walker. You know, the guy Oswald allegedly took a pop shot at. The crazy Nazi general. who resigned because he thought the Kennedys were communists. Okay. At that point, the only thing Harry knew about Walker was what he had heard through people in the John Birch Society, namely that, JFK had fired him and it was all unfair and yada, 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 and all that stuff. Walker, at this meeting after the John Birch meeting, according to Dean, stood up and announced to everybody there, who wasn't very many people, Dean was there, that the communist menace was going to be hit hard, and it was going to be hit hard in Dallas in November. Now remember, I'm going to stop right there. Remember, Dean was telling this story to the FBI in 1964. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. That he said the communist menace was going to be hit hard in Dallas in November. And the patsy had been selected. He was an officer of the FPCC, and his name was Lee Harvey Oswald. Communist menace, that's all that Walker said according to Dean. A few days later, near the end of September, Guy Gabaldon asked Harry to drive him to John Russello's office, and Gabaldon was going to pick up $10,000. $10,000 for the purpose of assassinating JFK. Dean says he learned that with this money, Gabaldon was going to send Loren Hall and Lawrence Howard, to pick Oswald up in New Orleans, drive him to Dallas, then to Mexico City. Here we go, another Mexico City scenario. And Oswald would meet Gabaldon and receive more instructions. Oswald would think he was working for La Sombra, Loren Hall's Cuban raiding group, for a raid on Cuba. Because Oswald, he was really a fake Fair Play for Cuba committee officer. Well, Harry did all that. Dean did all that. And he saw Gabaldon's big old smile when he got the $10,000. So he got nervous, but Dean forgot all about it until JFK was murdered. And he thought, well, anybody could have done it. He thought anybody could have done it. But then when Lee Harvey Oswald was paraded across the TV, that's when he immediately came to believe that the meeting he had attended with Walker and Russello and Gabaldon was the real deal. And remember who else he places at that meeting and ties with Oswald: Loren Hall and Lawrence Howard. Loren Hall and Larry Howard. Inner Pin Mercenary. Mercenaries, half-cocked rifle, Jerry Hemmings rifle, Eladio Del Valle. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but here we go again. From a completely different source. Los Angeles, Loren Hall and Lawrence Howard. Los Angeles, Roy Hargraves, William Seymour. Wow. And in 1964, Dean told the FBI everything. But they didn't believe him. They already had their man, Lee Harvey Oswald. They told him to shut up and go away. And he never changed his story. The man never changed his story one time. And that is absolutely to his credit. Absolutely to his credit. Now, back to 1968. Listen to this short exchange. Speaking of General Walker. Speaking of General Walker. And they're coming out of, I think, a tape change or something. Anyway. And he says, about General Walker. This is the guy asking the questions. Do you deduce from that, you say you know Walker? Do you think it's true he might be involved? First of all, do you know that Oswald was supposed to have taken a shot at Walker? Dean, I think Howard took a shot at Walker. Laughter. You think Howard took a shot at him? Certainly. He was in Dallas with all those other crumbs. I don't believe Oswald did. I don't care. I don't want to try to prove anything. I'm just telling you who did what, and why. Oswald was supposedly had someone with him, the interviewer says. There were perhaps two people involved. Dean, Billy Seymour or Howard, who was always hauling his big Mexican carcass around trying to pull some sort of caper or another, right? I believe it. Oswald was a rat. He was a fink, just like I was, a rat, a fink. We did things to which we were completely opposed. We committed treason for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, if you know what I mean. We did things that even the communists wouldn't. They blamed the communists for doing. We did it. We led them. We organized them. Think about what he just said. We committed treason for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We did things even the communists wouldn't. You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of E. Howard Hunt's quote to his son, St. John. You know, in his confession where he said, how did he put it? I may not get exactly right, but he said something like, to defeat what we saw as the ultimate evil, we realized we must become still more evil. It's kind of the same thing, what Dean said there. But I tell you what, Dean leads into something very, very, very interesting, or somebody very interesting in the narrative, guys and gals, and that is ex-Major General Edwin Walker. That guy is very, very interesting. And if you think Walker's only tie to the case is that Lee Harvey Oswald, because he was a lone nut goofball, just happened to take a shot at him too, you are very mistaken. And we are going to learn we're going to talk more about the narrative of Harry Dean next week a little bit. But we're going to lead in and we're going to start learning about, again, a very, very interesting character. Major General Edwin Walker. So, hey guys, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for playing along. This is the 22 November Network. This is the Dallas Action. Thanks for playing along, like I say. We'll talk to you next week. Out.
Just put your head down and go. Step aside the piece of the circumstance. Gotta wash away the dust of evidence. Wash it away. I didn't